Good evening, folks. This is Mike Scott at Farm Table and speaking out into my computer and get to at least see Terry. If you want to turn your video on, we can see your faces. You're welcome to do that. I would encourage you to keep your self muted, of course, as probably all of you know by now. So yeah, indeed, back here for another Zoom session, and so grateful we at least can do that together. I hope this finds you all well. We're glad to have Terry here with us. She's one of our favorite instructors, as many of you know, and of course, Lefse, making Lefse is a tradition now, essentially, at Farm Table. We usually do one every year, and usually in person at Farm Table, but hopefully you all have at least something you can try using at home if you don't have the right equipment, so to speak. And I think we did send you some options for what you can use if you don't have the classic specific items. So Farm Table is, mission is to build local food culture, and we do that through building community, supporting conservation through the kind of farming we support, meaning organic local farmers. And then we also work to teach the local crafts of local food, whether that's growing or cooking or preserving. Terry's been teaching with us for years, and she's a longtime Amory resident who has grown a lot of her food in her life. So really feels closely connected to our mission in many ways and our organization. So thank you, Terry, for being here as always.
Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to start tonight with a little bit of a sad story. Ole was on his deathbed, feeling pretty bad, but he could smell Lena's Lefse wafting up the stairs. He thought to himself, I have to get just one more piece of Lefse before I'm done. And so he worked himself out of his bed and down the stairs and crawled into the kitchen and made his way to open the refrigerator door and was just grabbing the best little piece of Lefse, and a hand came out of nowhere and gave him a slap, and Lena's voice boomed, no, Ole, that's for the funeral. So that, I think after that, then we all say, oofda. So, welcome to my kitchen and to our Zoom Lefse class, which is not quite as hands-on and fun as when we have tables all over and people making, and hopefully we can get back to that next year.
But Terry, can you at least throw flour around so we feel like we're kind of in your kitchen?
Well, it will probably come to that. Lefse started out as a rather unremarkable flatbread in the Viking times, where all the bread was flat and hard. Usually to eat it, you would soak it in a little milk or water or ale. It wasn't until 1750 that potatoes came to Scandinavia. And then over time and use, and when people using their grains and trying to stretch their grains, eventually there was all kinds of things that they would put in to stretch the flour, even including in really hard times, bark from trees. If they had potatoes, they tried that, and it was the most delicious combination. And so I think from that early time, Lefse has been a really special bread, really unique in the world, and soft. And I think people a lot of times crave a soft bread to put with their meals. So there's equipment and there's potatoes, and so of what you can use and what is best to use. And first thing we'll start with is your potato choice. You're going for a dry, starchy potato. And the reason for that is that if you can keep your potato ingredients dry, that they don't get wet on you, you can make a thinner Lefse. What you're going for is a thin Lefse. One of my stories I always tell the Lefse class is about the old Norwegian bachelors looking for a wife. They didn't care how thin she was. their criteria was how thin she could roll her lefse. I always liked that story because I, was always kind of slim challenged in my life. So great story. The Burbank russet potato, that's a heritage breed. That's considered the best for making lefse. And it's a dry, starchy potato. But I will say I have made it with, I've made it with Yukon Gold. I've made it with little German butterballs, because at the farm table, we generally use what our farmers have. And that's what they had for a couple of years. And I didn't really have a chance. I think just last year was the year that I had russet potatoes to use. And all of them work. They all work. You all get lefse. But if you have, after you're making it, you kind of want the goal to be the best lefse that you've ever made. And the way you get that is with keeping your potato dry and that, yeah, so I'm going to say first is cooking the potatoes. You want them done through, but you don't want them overdone. So you, now what I've done here is I've cooked these just now, just up to done, and I've let them sit in the water a little longer than I would want to. You want your potato pieces all about the same size, and then it is, it's also good to put them in a towel and dry them off even. And then you take one of the first tools, and I'll kind of name tools as I'm going through them. Potato ricer is good to have. You got to get all the lumps out, and that's just a pretty critical element. And so the one thing I did was leave those potatoes in water a little longer than I would. Usually when they're done, they're out of the water, they're on the towel, and you're drying them off. All this seems kind of fussy, but I found doing it this way today, I ended up with the best lefse I've ever made. So I said, those people, of course, they know what they're talking about. When I was making it at farm table, of course, we have 20, 30 people coming, and I have 30 pounds of potatoes cooking, and you just can't really spend the time you should, monitoring the exact temperature and how your potatoes are done. But by yourself, that's a whole nother story.
So Terry, how long would you usually have the potatoes in the water? You said you had them in there longer than usual, but.
Well, yeah, because they came up done about 10 minutes ago. And so I would have pulled them out right away.
So do you just put them in there really briefly to cool them off?
No. Now these are hot. You can take that. These are hot and riced. And I'm adding the butter right now. While they're hot, you add the butter and mix it in really well. It's really important not to have any lumps of butter. You want it all melted and into your potatoes.
And do you recommend using the finest grate option on the ricer?
Yeah, they're, it's pretty much, they have one setting. This is a smaller ricer. But yeah, if you have choice of grates, it's certainly the smallest, because it's really important not to have any lumps. Lumps will give you trouble later. And then so you've got it nice and mashed up, like a really nice mashed potato here. Now you want to set it in the refrigerator, and you won't use this today. This will be for tomorrow. All right. Now we can move on this stuff. All right. Now, these are my mashed potatoes from yesterday, cold from the fridge. And I believe you have the recipe of 4 cups of rice potatoes, and it already has the butter in it. And then it has a little sugar, salt, and flour. Now I'm going to do half the recipe because it's really important once you make your dough, you've got to use it. I'm going to do half a recipe, which is 2 cups of potatoes. I cooked up about 5 pounds of potatoes yesterday, and that should make 20 to 30 lefse, depending on the size. Now, just before you're going to start rolling is when you want to mix this part up. And we have our 2 cups of potatoes. We have sugar, little salt, and 1/4 of a cup of cream. Now we're going to blend this part up. And then I'm going to add my 3/4 cup of flour, which is the half recipe. And just bring that around until it comes away from the bowl. Now you can do this all by hand, just a little easier on a mixer. You wouldn't use a food processor at all. A food processor would break up your gluten strands and the potato spiders, and you need that to stretch your dough. So now we're pulling away from the side of the bowl really nice.
Terry, Ruth Ann asked, she said she's seen some recipes that recommend covering the potatoes overnight with a dish towel so more moisture evaporates. What do you think?
Yes, I would agree with that, yes. You don't want, rather than covering with plastic or something, because even like when I did these potatoes here, this is a very important question. Now, I'm not going to, no, that's fine. Those that were just done and are hot, they are not going into the refrigerator until they are completely cold. And then when they go into the refrigerator, put the towel over them. Because to do so sooner, that's just twice as much moisture. And this is the key. The key thing is to keep them dry. Now I use a scoop. This is 1/3 of a cup scoop at the center at the farm table. I used 1/2 cup scoop. And I just make out my potato balls. And then you want to keep them cold. So your working time a bit more on that one. Okay, done with that. All right, now these are going to take me a while to get done. So what I'm going to do is just start with a couple, and then I'll have Nubia put those in the fridge, and then I'll just call for them a little bit later again. Now, we'll talk about our equipment as we use it. This is nice to have. This, if you can see, this is the Bethany covered board that is just for Lefse. If you can see, it has circles that are 10 inch, 12 inch, and 14 inch. And you can you should, try to get your Lefse as nice and big as you can. Then number 2 thing is a rolling pin. This is a special rolling pin. It is a special grooved rolling pin. If you can see, it has grooves all the way up and down it. And this is also for getting your Lefse really thin. And then over the rolling pin, you put a sock. It's called, and this will this also helps you to roll your Lefse nice and thin. And we just put that like that. Okay, I'm trying to mention the equipment as we go along. And then a grill is really nice. People, of course, made it for hundreds of years on an old wood stove, which is great because it gets great heat. I could make it on my stove, but I wouldn't want to because these glass tops are just not made for that continuous heat. I'd be afraid to do that. If you had one of the coil type electric stoves, I got that really hot and that wouldn't hurt it any at all, or a gas stove, but it's difficult to keep the temperature even. The nice thing about this is you put it up to 500 and it will stay there. And then the only thing you have to be worried about is these little electric controls. And so with the group that I learned to make Lefse with, that would be the ladies over at the Mo Lutheran Church, they do 2 hours and then they stop and you let your unit cool down because these burn out a lot. And you can order extra ones. I usually have 2 or 3 extra on hand, especially when I'm doing a class because they kind of poop out on you. So we have a rolling pin, we have our cloth, and then the first step is to take some of your flour, and I'll mention that we're using the Sunrise Flour Mill Heritage Flour today, white heritage flour that you can get at the farm table. And your first step is flouring your board. Let's see if I can. And you take flour and you just rub it in really well. And then you flour your sleeve on your rolling pin. Now, we take our piece of...
Sorry, Terry, I just typed into the chat box that Sunrise Flour Mill is milled in North Branch, Minnesota, and it's all organic and heritage. And
yes, and local, yeah.
Quite a few folks find that even if they're gluten intolerant, they can eat this bread made from this flour.
Often, yeah. Now you form yourself what looks the most like a hockey puck. You take your ball of dough and flatten it out. And if you spend a little time going around the edges so they're not cracked, that makes for a prettier Lefse. And then we're going to start by putting your piece of dough right in the center and bringing it out. Now you can turn your board. Now we're getting it so We can see right through. I can read the words on the pastry cloth. Don't know if it shows up on your screen at all, but I can see the words there. We're past 12 inches. We're heading for 14. And it's always like you really don't think it could be any thinner. And you just go around and around, and it just gets thinner. That's quite. You don't want to fold it up on yourself. A little bit of care. Okay, we made it to 14 inches. That's great. Next thing, next unit that's important to have, that is helpful to have. And I mean, you could, it's going to be hard to get a 14 inch off with a spatula. We have these Lefse sticks, simple pieces of wood that are rounded at the bottom. And do check them, because after they're used, they get little tears and rips, and they can tear your Lefse. But what you do is you get on under it, and you kind of walk it through, make sure it's not sticking anywhere. Then you come back through about 1/3 of it, and you pick up your Lefse and right over to your hot griddle, and then you just walk it off the stick. There are other kinds of sticks. There are these, which are thinner. These are kind of considered the beginner sticks. They're a little bit easier. These are thinner, a little more rounded. Maybe you need to have a little more practice before you want to get on those. And then I had a conversation with a lady who was in my high school class. It turned out this year was my, I think it's 60-year reunion. Anyway, she was closing up her house, and we were talking about foods, and I told her that I was doing a lot of Scandinavian cooking, and she said, "You wouldn't want my great-grandmother's Lefse stick, would you?" And she said it's over 100 years old. So I said, "Sure, of course." And you can see this one is worn so much that I think it has worn down. I think she used that much of the wood up. It's pretty cool. And there's like little burn marks on the tips too. So let's see what's happening here. Then also you have a floured side with little flowers on it, and one that has nothing on its side. And we're getting little bubbles here, so we're going to turn it over. And then, if you can see, now we have our little brown spots on here.
So it's just, is it bubbling at all, or is it mainly brown?
This one's not bubbling a lot, but it usually does. Your next tool that you want is a nice big heavy bath towel. And you just lay it like so. And you cover it up, and it kind of steams there. And take.
What's the purpose of the towel, Terry? Just to keep it moist?
Yeah, it sort of steams itself. You can stack like 12 of them together, and they cool down, but they kind of steam, and they keep each other soft. And then when they're cooled down and you're done, then you can take them and usually fold them in quarters and put them in a plastic bag. So, and don't forget to flour your board. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to have an extra one of these. Because if you get any of your dough sticking to this, it's really a nightmare, because then every Lefse will stick after that. So here we go. And then by rolling it in with your rolling pin, you're also getting flouring well your rolling pin. And if you can tell, this doesn't, because sometimes you can just take and also just put, I've had ladies tell me that they don't use the sock, but they just rub flour into the grooves of the rolling pin. I'm sure there's many ways to do it as people who do it. It's always so surprising how thin you can get it, because you think, my gosh, I'm really got it all, the thinner it will go. And then you just keep going around and it just gets bigger and bigger. Now this one has a little tiny hole. It's not to worry. Don't try to patch it. I hear my heater thing making sound, so I hope she's hanging in there. And this one is starting to bubble now. And it's just a matter of minutes. Always check your sticks on the right side. The wrong side it'll tear. And then we have our little brown dots. I wonder if I shut off the big light and just turn on the side light, if you could see that better. I don't know. You can kind of see the little brown dots up there.
And we can see the bubbles now and a little more contrast.
Yeah.
And Terry, do you notice any significant difference between Lefse griddles in terms of temperature? Is 500 usually always the best temp?
Yeah, a lot of the recipes say 400, but really 500 I find much better. I also note, I don't know if I mentioned, we have 2 sticks is nice. They taught me over at the Mo Church, there was, you have a hot stick and you have a cold stick. So this cold one will reach under and bring out another lefse, and we'll just layer it right on top there. And the colors are turning, it's beautiful, and these are really nice and thin. Any other questions about how we're doing this here?
Yeah, there was, the one was also, have you found difference between griddles?
Bethany Foundation makes all this Lefse stuff. And so if you're buying one of their grills, and I get all my Lefse stuff at Lefsetime, it's called, in Fountain City, Wisconsin. A really nice little company. I like to order from them. They package everything up so pretty, and they even put a little piece of candy and a little sweet note inside. It's so sweet. So they got my business. And then it's local. That's kind of the key to everything. And no, so if you're buying their product, it's consistent. And it's always good to grab an extra control, because if you're going to be making a lot of Lefse, they burn out. And so I'll always also keep the 2 hours in mind. if you're going to sit here alone and make lefse, 2 hours is quite enough for a while. Usually, it's kind of a party and you invite everybody over. You have a big pot of coffee and everybody rolls and gossips and has a good time. And that's the best way to do it.
There's a couple troubleshooting questions, Terry.
Yeah.
What if your dough isn't rolling well?
Probably needs more flour, but you don't want too much flour. You want just enough. Is it sticking?
We'll let Linda chime in there if it's sticking. While she's doing that, another question, what if your edges are dry?
Well, yes, that can certainly happen. And I think that it's been on the grill just a tad too long. It always seems like it's not quite done yet, but usually it is.
And do you usually time that, or is it mainly by look, Terry?
Just by looking at it. Yeah. Just by looking at it.
Yeah, Linda responded, Terry said she's had it be sticky, but then not sure how to fix it without making more problems.
Yeah, it doesn't. Let me grab me one of those potato balls. Now, when you're feeling your potato ball for the correct consistency, it shouldn't be at all wet. There's a moisture feel, but is nothing wet. Nothing wet on your hands. Dry is the key from when you're making your potato and all the way on through when you're mixing it up with cream and butter. Dry, but not overly dry. The amount of flour in a recipe is, you don't want to add more than a half a cup more flour while you're rolling and things. That's kind of the rule of thumb, but it'd be pretty hard to do up to a half a cup more of flour. Were your potatoes russet potatoes that you were having trouble with being a wet dough? And here we're bubbling already. And you do want to stay on it. You do always want to check that you have your right side down. Turn it over. Oh, it's beautiful brown little spots there. And we're bubbling.
Terry, I didn't catch the two sides of the Lefse stick. What's the difference between the two?
One side is more flat, and this side is kind of beveled down. There's a slight bevel in the wood, and then you can reach under without tearing it.
Terry, Linda just mentions that her potatoes, it sounds like were a mix of potatoes, and she hadn't had this kind of instruction yet. So
I gotcha. And that might be what has happened, is a mix of potatoes. Also, really important on potatoes, they should be fully dormant. Now, that means that they should be like 6 weeks after harvest, 6-8 weeks. That's going to be hard for you to know if you're getting them at the supermarket. But then they definitely should not be setting eyes, because that means that the potato is drawing in too much moisture, that it's accumulating moisture. So even if you had russet potatoes, they could be more sticky. And then I think a mixture of potatoes, you've got, you know, probably waxy and not so waxy. It's hard to keep that uniform, hard to keep them all getting done at exactly the right time too. I guess the thing that I thought my lefse today was actually the best that I had made because of the time that I actually was able to spend on cooking the potatoes just to the very moment they were done, getting them out of the water, drained and riced yesterday, and then mixing them up today, and then just doing what I could roll out and not, you know, when we have a whole bunch of people at the farm table and I had to do like 120 balls so everybody would have a dozen left. I just had to charge ahead and make my balls and put them in the fridge. And that's not ideal. And it can lead to stickiness. And we often had stickiness with, you know, people's lefts are sticking to the board. If you don't have an extra piece of cloth to change to, one trick that you can do is to take this off and turn it upside down. It might not be all the way through. That might work. The thing that most people do is just get a knife and scrape that spot until, you know, it all comes away and you can't really feel any stickiness. Rub some more flour in there, and it's kind of, you just learn by doing.
And Terry, have you ever tried adding any herbs like chives or thyme?
No, I haven't. You know, I wouldn't, because those things can tear. It just tears so easy, especially when you want to go thin. If you were making a thicker lefse, maybe you wouldn't care. You were going back like to Viking flatbread or something, then it'd be cool to do. But no, I would save for your fillings or whatever, however you wanted to use your lefse, and save your herbs for that.
And have you made other kinds of lefse that is not potato lefse?
No, I make all kinds of flatbreads. I know there is a Norwegian hardanger lefse, which I believe it's all flour and it's hard. So if I'm doing flatbreads or other flatbreads, I wouldn't choose lefse for that. I would choose some of the other flatbreads of the world. And you kind of, we got a little bit of stickiness there, but I'm going to go backwards on this one. Okay, so I know this time of year also, sometimes even Walmart, Farm and Fleet, and your local hardware store, just because this is a really Scandinavian area, really Norwegian area, they will often have this equipment on hand, a good deal of it. Now, there are several schools of thought on what to fill your lefse with. There are people who just like butter on it. That's the way I like it. There are people who have to have sugar, brown sugar, cinnamon and sugar, some kind of sugar on it, which is fine. The only thing I don't like is when they go ahead and sugar it for everybody. I always think that should be an option. And then, of course, then in more modern times, and here's where you can bring in the herbs and fill it with an herb cheese, with meatballs, with anything, do it like a tortilla wrap.
Terry, Ruth Ann is saying that if you were to tell her mom to not sugar it, she would rebel.
I know a lot of people like that. Also, Elaine in our Swedish club, I know she's a dear lady and she always makes such wonderful lefse, and she's always going that extra mile for you. And so she's not going to just give you a piece of lefse. She's going to put sugar and roll it up. And that's all good. It's all good.
Is it traditional to only make lefse this time of year, or was it made year-round?
Well, I was thinking about that. The potato harvests are in. The potatoes are just at the optimal stage for making lefse. So, and then it's the holiday thing, and like getting together with relatives to make it is very normal in Scandinavian families, whether it's making the Scandinavian cookies for the holidays or lefse or just whatever the specialties are. It's a great family tradition, something to start, something for your grandchildren. I know I remember, and I remember the days of our family. It wasn't lefse. I came to this quite late in life, but it was all the various Christmas cookies and the krumkaka, and there would be all the aunts. And us young girls would be given the job of rolling the krumkakas, and there'd be 4 or 5 of us at the table rolling, and 4 or 5 aunts frying up krumkaka. And it's the same with lefse. As long as you got a nice big pot of coffee. Although I read some people prefer beer. No problem with that. That would work. That must be the rougher Norwegian crowd. I don't know. Well, if it's morning, you probably don't want beer. Any other questions? Do we have kind of a handle on what we're doing here? And does it seem doable?
Karen did ask if you could show us how you fold the lefse to serve it.
You betcha. I think that's what I'm supposed to say too. You betcha. So then, if you can see me, I'm just putting it in half and then in half again. And you make this little triangle here, like so. And oh my gosh, these are the thinnest and driest and nicest ones that really so much better than when I was working with, like 30 pounds of potatoes all at once. So it does make a difference to concentrate and spend time on your potatoes. Your potatoes are so key, and I really didn't realize how actually important it is to having the thinnest and lightest tasting lefse, which is, I'm sure, the way Lena makes it.
And Terry, you said it was important to get them done just right, and it's like not too soft, but you also want them done all the way through, right?
They have to be completely done. There's people who go to extremes. There is a technique called retrogradation, where you bring the potatoes up to 160 to 170 degrees, and you stop them, and you let them cool down, and then you bring it back up to temperature to a boil, and then you cook them, and in that way you have kind of encapsulated each potato, and then it's less likely to take on water. So you can get really involved in your potato, and it does seem to make a difference. So I think we're good. I think we've done did a little short stack there. So let's see. I don't know if there was any other things I had on my notes. So yes, I think that's about it. If you know, all this equipment can be easily purchased, and if you're, you know, the thing is, everything lasts forever. Like this 100-some-year-old stick, and you can pass it down generations. We had often in our farm table classes, there were folks coming in who had all the equipment that had been passed down, but that they had never used it and always kind of meant to, but then thought that was a great time to start learning how to use it and bring their kids, and so that it would be something their kids would remember. So
Janet just typed in, thanks for a great class. My grill and tools are arriving this weekend, so it'll be a great weekend project. Oh no, arriving tomorrow, so it'll be a great weekend project.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Do you prefer the non-stick griddle over the aluminum griddle, Terry?
They both work fine. I like this griddle a lot. I've never seen any problems with the other ones either. It just, you know, it just seemed like a step up, and I've never seen anything stick to the aluminum one either. I know most of the ladies at the over at the Lutheran Church are using the aluminum finish ones, and they've been doing it for so many years. It's just cute to watch them. And the people who do the mashed potato mix, they're not measuring. They just know by feel, and they just have a big bowl in the sink, and somebody brings them potatoes, and the lady just feels it with her hands and knows when it's just right, and then she makes scoops and sends out to everybody, and everybody rolls until they have to sit down for a bit.
What church sponsors that, Terry?
That's over at Mole Lutheran Church in Clear Lake. They have a big lutefisk dinner usually. They're not having it this year, but every fall. And then they always make like 500 dozen or something of lefse, an incredible amount. And they serve it with the dinner, with the lutefisk and meatballs and lefse is pretty much expected. And then they make packages to sell because it's a really good fundraiser that you get good homemade lefse, which isn't always the case. You know, store-bought is okay. A lot of times I think they use instant potatoes, and there is a common instant potato recipe. I read where a lady said that she was telling her grandma that she found this instant potato recipe and she was going to make it, and she left the recipe on the counter, and apparently her grandma went by and wrote awful across the top. So she didn't know she was going to try that. It doesn't take that much more to use some real potatoes, and less processing of food is always better. So I'm four square in favor of using real potatoes.
Well, folks are typing in their thank you, and that really enjoyed this, Terry. It was really fun.
I hope it was helpful, and I hope that encourages people to get out and try it and make it a family tradition.
Absolutely, I'm sure it will. Feel free to check out our website for upcoming classes, and including Terry's upcoming one on on
We're,
Scandinavian treats.
yeah, we're going to be doing cinnamon, 2 kinds of cinnamon rolls, and we'll be doing Danish kringle, which is wonderful. A Norwegian, a Swedish, and a Danish, which is kind of really nice for like Christmas breakfast or something. So thank you all.
Have a good Thanksgiving, everybody. And Terry, thank you very much, as always. It's a delight to
Thanks,
see you.
Bob.
All right. Good night. Take care.
Night. Thank you.